Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, TIFU by forgetting where I parked and reporting my stolen car to the police. So I have two sons, my eldest 8 at the time of this incident and my youngest 2 years younger. My eldest was part of the school inline hockey team and his brother played soccer at the local club. They both had games on Saturday mornings and this regularly ended in double bookings. This wasn't usually a problem as my husband would watch one game and I the other. However, this weekend my husband was called into work teaching English at the local university for the day. I managed to get another mother from the hockey team to take my son as well as her child, and I would pick him up after the game. So long story short, my youngest soccer game ends early, so I find myself with the time to see most of my son's hockey match. Now there are 3 parking spaces at the local hockey field, a parking lot for the majority of the cars and 2 streets exiting it. After failing to find a park in my usual street, I begin the search for a space for my little Nissan to rest in the parking lot. This of course results in nothing. By now I'm beginning to think I have more chance of stealing North Korea's entire nuclear arsenal single-handedly than finding a park in this zoo. However, I dig deep and find the strength to search the last exit street. By the grace of God I manage to find a space and dash to see the last half of my son's game. After half an hour of expelling the remaining cheers from my voice box, I return to the exit street with my sons to find the car has disappeared. After an hour or so of freaking out, I eventually call my sister who taxis me home. I soon report my stolen car to the police who alert all their officers of the situation and will do their best to find the vehicle. 2 weeks pass and still no sign of my blessed Nissan. Just as I'm giving up hope, the phone rings. I answer the call and to my joy I am told that my car has been located, suspiciously near where it was reported stolen. So me and my family head out to the location and after a few minutes of downtown traffic spot the car. At this point I'm expecting it to be looted, trashed, useless or all of the above. The car is in horrible condition, the exact same as I left it, and has a full tank of gas. I then realize, after the game I went to the exit street I usually park on and had a full-on 2 weeks of brain spasm. This remains one of those stories my family likes to bring up at any and all social events. I hope you laughed as much as my in-laws did. Disclaimer, written by my mother, I'm her eldest son. The next one is titled, Woman Damages My Mum's Car and Blames My Mum. Her corrupt cop boyfriend covers it up and ruins both of their reputations. For some background, I live in a predominantly white suburban town in New Jersey and my family is Asian. Although the town is alright for the most part, it is not really a secret that some of the townspeople are pretty racist. One of our neighbors, let's call him Anthony, is a retired police captain from another town, but he is friends with my town's police chief. My mother is a first-generation immigrant, and although she's fluent in English, she still has a pretty thick Asian accent. A couple of years ago, my mum went to visit one of her friends on the other side of town. My mum had parallel parked directly in front of her friend's house, which is at the bottom of a small hill. As she was leaving, a woman driving a Jeep Wrangler with her children was driving down the small hill, but she was still a decent distance back, so my mum pulled out of her spot. The road they were on was really wide, with enough space to fit 5 cars next to one another, and about 40 feet ahead was a stop sign. My mum at this point was already in the middle of the road, fully out of the parking spot, and had gotten about 10 feet when the woman driving the Jeep suddenly came up from behind my mum's car and cut directly in front of her, crossing a double yellow line to do so. Because of the angle she cut off my mum at, the Jeep's rear wheel ended up ripping off my mum's front bumper. My mum naturally immediately stopped, and the woman got out of her car after straightening it out on the road. As soon as she stepped out of her car, this woman, we'll call her Karen, immediately starts cursing my mum out at the top of her lungs. Karen told my mum to call the police, but my mum told her that her phone had died. My mum's friend and her son, as well as the neighbor, came out of the house after hearing the commotion to see what had happened. The neighbor, an elderly man, asked what happened and Karen yelled, "Are you ducking blind? A ducking accident happened. Go call the police." I need to call my boyfriend. The son had taken a law class in college, so he offered to take a bunch of pictures of the scene of the accident and send them to my mum later. This becomes super important later. The neighbor calls the police, but Karen's boyfriend arrives at the scene first. When the cop, let's call him Kenny, finally arrives, he asked my mum what happened. Just as my mum had just started saying her side of the story, the cop says, "Wait just a minute," and walks over to the boyfriend. As it turns out, the boyfriend, we'll call him Sam, was a cop in the town who was pretty popular with the kids in the middle schools, since he would occasionally visit to talk about things like DARE and other things in assemblies. Sam was off duty at the time, so he was able to come over when Karen called him. As soon as Kenny saw his bud Sam, he immediately went to go talk with him rather than with my mum or with Karen. They discussed for a little while and afterwards sent everyone on their way. My mum tried to talk to Kenny before he left, but Kenny just brushed it off and said he got the details he needed and that my mum would be able to get the police report in about a week or two. When my mum receives the police report, she saw that it said that she pulled out without using her blinkers suddenly and hit Karen's car. On top of that, Karen was expecting for my mum's insurance to pay for the damage done to her rear wheel. My mum went to my neighbor Anthony to ask what she should do about the report since it was clearly wrong. Anthony was furious and told her that she should go to the police station and ask to see the chief, and if they ask why she needs to see him, she should tell them that it's because she wants to file an internal complaint. That day, my mum takes the photographs sent to her by the son and goes to the police station and asks the person working the front desk to see the chief. The cop says that she could not just walk in and ask for the chief. So my mum responds, "Okay, so where should I go to file an internal complaint?" And the cop immediately straightens up and says, "Right here. Come with me." He leads her into the back. The deputy chief steps into the room and started recording the conversation. Since the chief was out, my mum presented all of the evidence to him instead. After presenting the evidence to show that it was in fact Karen that hit her instead of the other way around, my mum also says that she would like to file a corruption complaint against both Kenny and Sam. Kenny clearly did not do his job properly since he did not properly ask the actual people involved in the accident and did not even note the fact that there were 2 passengers in Karen's car in the report. Even Karen later admitted to an investigator that Kenny never once spoke to her. My mum even threw in the racist card for good measure, saying maybe Kenny wouldn't listen to her and brushed her off because of her thick Asian accent. Sam meanwhile had interfered with the investigation despite not being at the scene of the crime during the time of the accident. The deputy chief says he will start an internal investigation and will see if anything needs to be done. Meanwhile, my mum also filed a claim to her insurance and presented the evidence to them too, and her insurance decides since the accident, in their eyes, was clearly not her fault, they weren't going to pay Karen a penny and that they would contact Karen's insurance to pay my mum instead. A lot of internal bureaucratic investigational BS happens, including interviews with Karen, my mum's friend, and the friend's neighbor. About a month passed and an officer comes to our house to tell my mum that Kenny had been punished, but there was not enough evidence to punish Sam, and he just wanted to know if there were any other concerns she had. Since Karen seemingly had not done anything to further warrant any action and the damage to the car was paid for, my mum said that there was nothing else. This is the fun part. 3 days after the officer came to our door, a letter came in the mail for a court hearing. Turns out, Karen decided to file 3 tickets about my mum just 1 day before the statute of limitations. Apparently, in NJ, citizens are allowed to file complaints about other citizens breaking the law, a thing that our family had never heard of before until this happened. And because of how late she filed these complaints, by the time we received them in the mail, we could not even counter-complain and the only options were to pay the fine or to go to court. We assumed that Karen learned about being able to file a complaint from Sam, because no crap, and that the only reason she was willing to go this far is because she heard my mum had a super thick Asian accent and assumed that my mum wouldn't know what to do about the tickets and would just pay up. What she didn't count on was the fact that my mum is actually really aggressive with an absolutely massive network of people that she knows. Within a day, my mum hired a lawyer to fight the case and they immediately asked to change the court from the small court in our town to one of the large courts a couple of towns away. The logic was that if she fought the case in our town, my mum would be at a disadvantage since her case was essentially going against our town's beloved police force. But by putting it in a different town, the playing field would be even. Additionally, while my mum worked from home in her own business, Karen had a full-time job in town, so going to court in a different town would be a huge pain in the butt for her. The lawyer had prepared a huge amount of evidence against Karen, so there was no way she was actually going to win the case no matter what. Come the court date, Karen never showed up, so the case was thrown out. That was a pretty nice win, but what came after was even better. Since my mother and sister have a lot of friends in town, the story of Karen and Sam doing this shady bullcrap got out really fast. Soon, half the town had heard about it, and suddenly Karen and Sam went from two favorites in the town because of Sam's reputation to two of the most underhanded and nasty people. Sam stopped getting invited to school assemblies and Karen was ostracized in her kids' school's PTA. Anthony also ended up talking to the police chief in private, and we found out that although Sam was not officially punished, he was severely reprimanded by the chief. The next one is titled, Neighbors Ran Over Our Fence. Dad installed concrete fence that wrecked 8 of their cars. We live in a small private neighborhood. The neighbors are related to us, more or less distant relatives. Everybody here is a complete nutjob. They were constantly arguing over decades before me or my brother was even born. Our property line is kinda like a square and it is surrounded by road from 2 sides. Keep in mind that on one part of the road we let our neighbors use 1 square meter of the land so they could use the road safer and not damage our property. This is crucial information. This road is made of gravel. The neighbors want my parents and only my parents to pay for the entire cost to lay an asphalt road. My dad and my mother are constantly fixing potholes for 90% of the road, so naturally, our neighbors thought that they were to pay for the asphalt road. Fast forward 20 years, the road remains gravel-ish. Nobody wanted to pay for the asphalt road. One day my neighbors order a massive truck filled with tons of wood. The truck driver runs over our fence. Nobody wanted to pay for the damage. Our fence is made out of multiple bushes, trees and a little bit of metal fence too. These plants were now completely destroyed and a part of metal fence completely bent. We had to replant these plants and place a new metal fence. My father told me this was not the first time this happened, but actually third. I couldn't believe it when I heard this. So this is where the revenge begins. My father is a police officer in the department where they mostly handle frauds, drug busts, etc. He knows the law well. He dug up the property line marker and placed plastic barrels filled with rocks on our property. In the next 6 hours 3 of our neighbors came knocking on the door because they hit our plastic barrels filled with rocks. They were angry and wanted to call the cops. But they never did. Because everybody knew that little part of land was still our property. One neighbor in particular threatened my dad that he will throw a ducking pickaxe at my father's back. Over the period of 1 year these neighbors hit the barrels so much with their cars that the barrels are now worthless. My dad was furious and he changed his petty revenge into a pro-revenge. He cut some wood to use it as a mold. He bought cement, sand and metal poles. One peaceful afternoon my father and I cemented that whole part of the land and placed some lovely flowers on top. So when they hit the concrete they can smell our flowers of victory, defeat. As we expected. 5 neighbors in total wrecked their cars on the new fence and nobody came knocking on the door. The next one is titled, I parked my friend's car in the sun. I learned to regret it. I live in the desert part of the US, and during a few months in the summer it is consistently over 110 degrees, 43.3 for my Europe bros. I was borrowing my friend's car for a quick drive, because mine was at the shop. He asked me to park it in the shade, but I could not find a shady spot so I couldn't. So when he went to use his car it was burning hot inside. He went to me and asked why I did not park it in the shade, and I told him I could not find any. He told me I would regret it and I thought he was joking. He then offered to pick up my car from the shop. I said yes because I thought he was going to just park it in the sun for a one-time revenge. So I drive a Prius and it uses automatic keys that open it when you go near it. This will be important later. He parks my car in the sun like I expected and gives back my keys. I expect this to be the end, but no. The next day I went to work and parked in my normal spot in the shade. One of the only shady spots there. After that I walked into work and proceeded as normal. Later I went to find my car during lunch, only to see it 3 spots over in the sun. I thought that it was weird, because I remember parking in my normal spot, but maybe I'm just tired and someone was already there in the spot, and I'm having a memory lapse. My car being in the sun, was burning hot. This continues to happen for like 10 more days, until I finally convince myself I'm not crazy. I start thinking, who the hell is moving my car? No one has a key but me. Then I remember my friend and what he said. He had to be the one doing this. I talk to him and he smiles. Apparently when he went to pick up my car, he got a new automatic key made for $300, and has been moving my car 2 or 3 spots over every day into the sun. Well, let's just say it did not stop after that, but instead he did it more. From my apartment to work, he made it his life's duty that summer to make my driving miserable. Also, if you're reading this name redacted, you know who you are. Duck you, dickhead. Additional info, for anyone who thinks it's fake, cause he could not get the key copied that easily. I had my title and registration in the car. I don't do that anymore because people have made me aware about how dumb that is. I would never take it out cause I would lose it. He also had my driver's license so the shop would let him pick up the car. I asked him and he said the people who made the key just asked for the registration and title and never even asked for the driver license even though he had it. Also he has stopped and given me back the key because it's winter now. This story is a few months old. He said that one summer was enough pain for my sin. The next one is titled, Good Luck Paying for the Car. So this isn't my story, it happened to a friend of a friend, so exact details are difficult to get, but this is what I was told. For ease of story and to hide identities, the names I will use are Jack and Jill. Bit of backstory. Jack and Jill had been going out for nearly 5 years by the point of this story. A year prior Jill lost her job due to the company she worked for being liquidated. Money got tight for Jill, so Jack offered to help by covering her car payments, monthly installment, road tax, insurance and fuel, so she could put the money she got to rent and utilities until she got a new job and was financially stable. Jack had a fairly decent job, so wasn't a strain on his income. A year goes by and Jill is still unemployed, but not through rejections. She got lazy and just spent all day doing nothing around her house whilst Jack was at work. One day Jack gets off work early and decides to surprise Jill on the way back home. But as he is approaching her house, he sees another car in her driveway. He parks on the street and sneaks up to the house and looks through the window to see Jill with another man. Jack was upset, but he didn't burst in there. He walked away, got into his car and drove off. When Jack got home, he did a little digging and found out who the guy was through Facebook, and found she had been having an affair for half a year with this guy. He was now really upset and wanted revenge, and he knew the best way to do it. This is where the revenge comes in. Jill loved her car even though she barely used it, so what Jack did was stop all the payment that were going out of his bank account and put them onto her account. As the car was in her name, it was easy to do. As the payments had only just gone out, he had to wait for the end of the month for his revenge to unfold. The end of the month comes and Jill's bank card is declined at the shops. She calls the bank up to find out what is going on, and they tell her she has gone overdrawn because of the car payments going out her account. Jill phoned Jack and asked why the payment is coming out of her accounts and not his. Jack coldly replied, "'Cause I know you cheated on me and I'm not gonna pay for my ex-girlfriend's car," and hung up. Fallout of the revenge, she tried to get Jack to pay for the car, even got lawsuits involved, but as she was the sole owner of the car, it was declared he had not legal responsibility to pay for her car. As she couldn't afford her road tax or insurance, she couldn't drive the car, and eventually she got so far behind in the payments the car was repossessed. To pay the debt, she had to get a minimum wage job and now takes the bus to and from work. The last one is titled, Luxury Car Dealership Wants to Treat Customer Like Dirt, Ends Up Washing His Car Instead. This isn't my story. It happened to my ex-classmate's dad, but it's too sweet of a story to not share. His dad is a pretty wealthy guy and owns his own construction business. My classmate always showed up in fancy clothes and cars. One day, Dad walks into a car dealership. He was interested in buying a Mercedes G-Wagon. He went inside and was ignored for almost an hour while other cuts were treated. Eventually a couple of salesmen approached Dad and asked him what he's doing here. Sad starts asking about the cars. The salesmen were very dismissive and sarcastic in response to him. It's clear they aren't taking him seriously and begin to leave. Dad becomes irritated and asks what their problem was. They argue for a minute when the manager comes and tells Dad to leave. Dad had just come from work and was wearing slightly dirty jeans, boots and a t-shirt. He's also a dark-skinned individual. Both of these factors probably made him look lower class in their eyes. Little did they know. A few weeks later, Dad ends up purchasing the car at another dealership. He negotiated free car washes for life as he traded in one of his luxury cars. Apparently he was able to go to other dealerships in the area who authorized the same thing regarding car washes. Dad ends up going to first dealership and throws the keys on the front counter. He demanded a car wash. The same manager eventually came by to object, but Dad showed him all the paperwork. He looked a bit shocked and begrudgingly got the process started. Dad has been going back almost every day for car washes. He always cheekily smiles at all the staff members with a crap-eating grin as a greeting, especially the two salesmen. They now just hang their head in shame and walk away whenever they see him. Thanks for listening.